In this episode, we're going to be covering how to add a simple platforming enemy, one that you would typically jump on top of and it kills the enemy, or if they touch you on their side, then they would damage you. So, what we need to do, we need to add a blueprint class, but we want to add a character because we want it to have some form of movement. So, if we add a character blueprint and we call this BP_basic enemy, and then we can start adding things to this. So just as a simple prototype, we can start adding everything in. So make this nice and small, just so it's going to be a little cube that's floating around on the floor. But then what we want to do is, I can rename this to enemy mesh, but then we want to add some collisions. So I'm just going to use box collisions, but choose whichever one suits your enemy style most. And I'm going to do side collision. So this is going to be the one that actually hurts the player. We want to have it not above, going above, so we want it to actually cut through. If you can see there, it actually goes in when I make it smaller than the border. So it's not going to go over, because then it'll start to overlap with the one that you want to have when you jump onto the enemy. So what we can do here, maybe make it a little bit bigger. There we are. So with this one, we want to begin overlap on that, get rid of these useless stuff, and then we want to actually use the take damage that we have implemented into the third person character. So this take damage that we did in a previous tutorial, we want to actually use that now in a sensible way. So with the begin overlap, from the other actor, cast to third person character. So that's just checking, is it the third person character? If it isn't, do nothing. And then from this, we want to do the take damage. But there's a thing we want to do first. So sometimes in Unreal, the overlap system can bug out a little bit and it can run twice, or if the player goes away from the enemy and back to the enemy really quickly, they could start getting their health sort of reduced very quickly. So you could potentially do the system that I'm going to show you in the take damage system if you wanted it where the third person character gets invincibility frames for a little bit, but I'm just going to do it for this, so it's sort of like a attack rate for the enemy. So we need to add a can damage variable to this, and what we're going to do is compile this, make it default ticked on the right, and then we want to do a branch. So with this, if the enemy can damage, then it's going to run through. What we then want to do is instantly set it to false. So because it's initially true, it will run through this whole code, but it won't be able to run again because it's immediately set to false. Then what we want to do is, in this, do take damage. Oh. And then get the function that we have made. So the reason why we need the cast to third person character first is because if we don't have this, it'll detect the flaw or anything around it, and it'll immediately set it to can damage is false, and then it'll start to have issues. So we need to have this first, so it's only detecting the character. But then from this, with the take damage, set that to any value you want. I'm just going to have it to 10. And then we want to add a delay. So this is going to be the attack rate of the enemy. I'm going to set it to 2 seconds, just because it's a basic enemy. For harder enemies, you might have that as a much quicker attack rate. And then we want to set that to true again. So I'll show you what that does. So if we go to the blueprint and drag that in, if I walk up to the enemy, it'll hurt me. I can do it again, but it's inside of that 2 seconds, so it won't damage. But then I'll slowly get that damage given. So with that, we then want to add the function where we can actually jump on top of the enemy and it damages them. So select the enemy mesh again, add another box collision. We want to call that top collision, and then add that on top there. What we then want to do is add another begin overlap. So an issue that will arise is because earlier in this series we had this interact detect sphere collision put in. This will start to detect that top collision, and the enemy will get defeated before you can even take damage. So we need to make it so it can only detect this capsule component here. You could potentially have it where it detects the mesh, but the capsule component is usually the safer bet for this. So what we need to do is firstly cast to the third person character, just so we're eliminating all other things running through. But then in the other comp we want to get the display name. So what we want to do is we want to actually find out what that name is. So quick way to do that is to do a print string and just find out what the name is. Then we can start to go from there and implement the code. So let's find out. So we've got interact detect, but we've also got collision cylinder. So as long as you remember the collision cylinder, so in the third person character it's using this name in brackets here and not the capsule component there. So get display name, but that had all of the other bits in the blueprint, so I think there's another one called get object name. So if we print string again, this one should be a lot cleaner. Yeah, so that's literally, with the get object name, that's literally getting just what's in that brackets there. So what we can then do is, if this string, so 3 equal signs and it's equal exactly, and then we want to get, what was it called again? Collision cylinder. Here's where you'll probably need to be double checking that the text is actually right, because you need to have it exactly what that says there. And then in this branch we've checked to see if it is the collision cylinder, that's the component that's overlapping. If it is the interact detect, it's going to ignore it. If it is true, then we want to destroy actor. However, usually in platformer games with these type of enemies, if you jump on top of them, it launches the player up a little bit, like a sort of bounce pad. So all we need to do, much like in the previous tutorial, we want to add a launch character, but it's much simpler because we just want to launch it upwards. So let's try 1000 and see how wacky that gets. Not wacky in the slightest. So it might be that you only want it as a subtle thing, but I'm going to do 2000 and see what that looks like. And that's far too crazy. Maybe 1250. There you are. So a nice little bounce to it, and then it destroys the actor. So that's a nice simple way to have it where when the enemy touches the side of the player, damages them, and when you as the player jump on top of the enemy, it destroys that enemy and launches you up a little bit. Last thing that we want to do for a very simple enemy that just chases the player when it can is to add some basic movement. So in a begin play, AI move 2, and then the pawn that's going to be moving is going to be self, so it needs to actually have a reference to itself to be able to move, and then the target actor is going to be get player character. If you are wanting a specific, maybe you've got like an ally NPC with you, you can do get actor of class, and then you can actually select from all the different blueprints. But because it's the player character, as long as it's a single player game, this will chase the player. So what it'll be is on begin play, AI move 2, on success, then delay for maybe 0.5 seconds and then do it again. But also on fail, we want to be able to do it again. And then if you double click this spaghetti here, you can actually add a reroute node, so you can actually see much better what's going on. So what it is, AI move 2, on success, delay 0.5 seconds, or on fail. So to be honest, you could probably just link up that and have it running through. But what this will do is, because this will just run through, whereas this will have the code a lot cleaner, and it will only trigger if there's been a successful movement or a failed movement. So this should work. So the enemy won't currently move because we don't have a navigation mesh. So what we need to do is actually add it where the player, where AI can move around. So if we put in, so click on this plus with a cube up there, and then go to volumes, and the top one, nav mesh bounds volume. If you press then P when that's in, you can start to see an outline of the navigatable area for AI. So with this, all this green area, the enemy can move around. So what it should hopefully be, or not, is the enemy should move, but a thing that happens with AI, very strange one, is when you place it in, it doesn't actually have an AII. So we need to do that, change that, and it's still not moving. So what's going on here? Let's have a look. Let's do some debugging. Okay, so it was just an issue that because it was already in there, it was trying to move around this area, which wasn't a navigatable area because it's sort of in its own little box. So we just need to lift it up a little bit until the green is actually there, and then it chases the player and then does all that stuff. So there's a little fiddling around, and there is bugs that are happening, as you can see, but for a very basic system with an army of fellas, we've got that there. And there you are.